no external factor or feature will ever give you that enough. And so I think allowing yourself to kind of, and it's not saying that I've even figured this out at all, but it's like I hope to feel that wholeness because I've allowed myself to just really accept like what's enough.
You know, if you're sharing from the place of one of those kind of semi-authentic everyday, you know, just getting through the day places, you're not really sharing anything.
I don't have to like rehearse anything that's in my mind. And I think that's the part of being vulnerable is that you're coming from a place where, like you said, you just are feeling in that in the moment. And maybe you had held that feeling for a while, but you're allowing that feeling to then be truly felt and expressed in that moment.
The name More Mindful Than You is a contradiction. Mindfulness isn't about competing or being more of something than anyone else. It's about searching through your soul, living from your heart, and making an effort each day to live through the truth of what is really real. The only place we can start from is now.
Hi. Welcome to the third episode of More Mindful Than You with your host, Candace Wade. On this third episode, we have one of my good friends from my study abroad experience in Valencia, Spain, Petrina Pinto. How are you, Petrina?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing really well. We haven't spoken in a while, so I'm super excited just to not only do this podcast with you, but be able to talk to you. And Petrina's always been someone with a lot of insightful things to say. So I'm just going to ask you, what are you up to right now? Like, I know that you have your Harvest Health, if you could talk about that, or school, or just anything that you want, really.
Yeah, so I am in my last quarter at Cal Poly. I'm studying ag business, and then I'm also, in the meantime, like getting certified as a health coach because health has always been a passion of mine ever since kind of I've been younger. Like, food has always been a central focal point in my life since I grew up from a huge Italian family, so food is pretty much all that we think about and do. So from that, it just kind of branched out from having like a little eating disorder, not even little, so I shouldn't minimize it, but an eating disorder in high school and kind of bleeding into college, and then finding how food helps not only like my physical being, but more importantly, my mental being. And honestly, having conversations like this has helped me so much. But through that, I've just kind of used platforms like my Instagram, Harvest Health, and my website, Harvest Health, to kind of just share my story and share recipes that use like real foods to instead of like processed foods for like those comforting or yummy recipe ideas that you would get using like more toxic ingredients.
Well, that sounds amazing.
That's kind of what I've been
You're
doing.
Busy. And so earlier you mentioned how you think food is important not only for your physical well-being, but mental. And, you know, I think most people would agree with that. You know, just from a simple example of someone eating a really crappy fast food meal and then just feeling awful. And you know, I've heard stories. I follow this YouTuber who also focuses on, you know, whole foods and that kind of thing. And I really get behind that theory that that's what we're really meant to be eating. And she said even on the days that she has bad mental health days, she knows that she can look forward to having a healthy or, you know, good meal, because if she's feeling bad mentally, she can at least feel good physically. So what do you think is, like, either from your personal experience or research or what you've been learning in your program, what do you think is, like, really what we need to be consuming and why? And what do you eat?
Well, thank you. Okay, so that's a lot to cover, but I'm excited. So honestly, it's just go back to the basics. Like, I went through so many phases. I feel like I'm even still learning now, like, what's working for my body and my phase in life right in the moment. But it all brings me back to just eat what's on eat what's from the ground. Like, if you're eating real food, and you could choose to be plant-based or vegan or even vegetarian or eat like meat, but make it real food. Like, if it's coming from a box, maybe limit your intake of that. But ultimately, what has helped me, like, mentally and a lot recently is with like my sleep, is making sure that I'm eating a lot of vegetables, like having my meals like veggie focused, and then adding all the little fun. But that doesn't mean that I'm not enjoying my meals. It's just learning how to create those meals that you do enjoy, but using the real ingredients. And I understand like a lot of people are lacking like the convenience or the time and the budget, but you kind of, in my opinion, you have to prioritize it, because the biggest investment you have in your life is yourself.
Right.
And I think health is like the vessel for being your best self, because if you don't feel good, you can't show up as how you want to in this world. So that's kind of how I've come to it right now. I always say like I'm a retired vegan, so I was vegan for 5 years, but through like
that's a funny term.
No, you're so good. But yeah, so like it was working for the first few years, and then I lost my period, and I was just going through things hormonally, and I didn't understand. I started like gaining weight, and so just my body was like telling me that like something's wrong, you need to change. But I was just ignoring it for a while, because I just deemed veganism as this like holy grail of like answering all my problems, which for some that may be it, but for my body that's not it.
Right. Because
now
I mean, you know that I'm vegan, and it's something that you know works for me. So I haven't been vegan for 5 years, so you know, like maybe that's something that I run into down the line, and everyone's body's different, so it's really hard to kind of, you know, pick which of the a million things that you're eating in a day is really doing it, you know. So yeah, I think prioritizing your health is obviously very important. And I know that you still eat like quite plant-based, so you know that's 100%. Still good, and yeah, just continue with what you were going to say.
So I've kind of come to this transition in my life, and just based off of how I'm even being active. So in the past, I would run. I was in cross country. I ran the Big Sur marathon. I ran half marathons, and so it's like I've always been going with cardio. But now I've been focusing on strengthening my body, because I really have noticed like the mind and muscle, like, or I guess like the mind and strengthening connection, and how I have to be mindful. But with that, like, I had to kind of change my like what I'm consuming. So I, like you said, I am really plant-based, but I also incorporate eggs and like salmon and fish, and sometimes I'll have chicken and turkey and even like grass-fed beef. But I really value like where these animal products are coming from, because I think that you're not only what you eat, but you're what you're eating is eating. Right. And so that is like, even in it's not even just for animals, but for your plants. Like, be wary of like what kind of soil your plants are absorbing, because that's where the nutrients is coming from, is from the soil.
Right.
And
that's been changed over, you know, past 50 years. I'm sure you know more about this than I do, but I mean, factory farming, that kind of thing, or you know, even just the really commercial produce that, for example, like my public elementary school gave us. It was just always, you know, like that green apple is what I always think of. It's like very bitter, and you can just tell that this thing is like 90% chemicals at least. And we need good produce in schools, and you know, for everyone. And yeah, so whenever me and Petrina lived in Europe together, what did you think? I mean, I think that the general consensus was that the produce and stuff was higher quality, and of course, like you can get into the whole discussion of like GMOs, because they don't allow them, which may be changing. I personally haven't researched it enough to have an opinion on that, but I think the food was just better quality, and I hope that it will rub off on the U.S. a little bit.
Yeah, I actually think that we are slowly returning back to our roots. I think that there's this movement, and it's like taking the form of like this wellness community and movement, and it may be trendy, but there's a lot of good that's coming out of it, because there's a lot of leaders and people are spearheading like change. But when we were in Europe, like that was when I transitioned out of my vegan diet, because I didn't want to limit myself from having those cultural experiences. And like, I love food, and I just didn't want to rob myself of that. So it was incredible how like my body responded, is that it didn't have any like bad reaction to it. And so it's really cool because in a few of my classes I've taken like food policy, and Europe actually bans a large extensive list of chemicals and additives and just the way that food is processed compared to America. Like if you compare the same box of cereal that's made from Kellogg's, let's just say Frosted Flakes, in America compared to the one in Spain, they're not going to have the same ingredient list, nor are they going to have the same nutrition facts, because the demand's different. And that's like what I think people should be remembering, is that like you are voting with your dollar every single day. The where you put your dollar is where you're saying that you support it. And so
which doesn't mean either that you need to go buy, you know, $10 juices or something. Just buy what you can, you know. Try do as much as you can.
Yeah, because you don't have to. It's just like kind of going back to like where I first started, is like you go back to the basics. It's like you don't need all these supplements and protein powders or any of that like extra stuff that people are marketing towards you to tell you that this is what will keep you like the most radiant and vital health. Is like, no, you go back to like the fruits and the vegetables and the like whole like proteins, like the whole like the healthy fats, like and that doesn't mean that you can't enjoy life. And like if your friends are going out to pizza and you have to say no to it, no, like enjoy that, because health goes beyond what's on your plate. And I think it ties into being mindful, is that health is like your environment, the people that you surround yourself with, your physical activity, your creative space, your financial being. There's so many components that I think are actually more important than what you put on your plate, because those are the things that fulfill you in life. And then ultimately what's on your plate will just balance out because you're aligning with what's on the other important parts of your life, if that makes sense. I don't know if I did that well.
It definitely does. Yeah, just you know, simple eating kind of ties into that whole lifestyle of living a relatively simple life. And I think whenever people hear that, they get kind of confused and say, well, I don't want to just do a few things. And then, you know, it's not that. It's living wholeheartedly, but doing, you know, eating well and focusing on the things that are most important to you. Kind of switching gears, I had another question that just popped into my mind. So you are doing health coaching, is that right?
Yeah, so I'm starting. I haven't gotten my complete certification, but halfway through the program, you're, I guess, allowed to take on clients. And so I am in the process of that. So yeah, I'm taking on 2 people right now, and it's really exciting because I don't know how I am as a health coach, and we'll see how it evolves.
See, that's what I was going to ask you about. So, I mean, you and I and a lot of our audience here, More Mindful Than You, are young people. And a lot of us are people who are trying to do, you know, some sort of entrepreneurial kind of endeavor. I know that I definitely, not necessarily now, but in the future want to be running some sort of business of my own, whether that be a graphic design firm, because that's kind of the path I'm getting into right now, or what. But what have been some challenges for you, either just, you know, out of like fears or logistics or whatever, to starting that kind of business as a young person?
Well, I just want to acknowledge. Oh, okay. Well, I wanted to first acknowledge that like you are already making entrepreneurial steps by just creating this podcast. So it's happening right now and can still continue in the future. So that's exciting because you're already making it happen for yourself.
That's why I cued in the fears, because definitely wasn't easy. You know, it's out of your comfort zone to this kind of thing, and not even just the time, because relative to podcasts, they don't require that much time, you know. You record it, you edit it a bit, you know, it's probably like 3-hour time requirement, at least for me, because I haven't yet started looking for sponsorships or anything. But yeah, I just want to know, was it out of your comfort zone to kind of publish that? Or, you know, big thing for, well, I'll just ask you that, and then I'll tell you about how I've felt with that.
Okay. Well, I think that I've always been kind of entrepreneurial, and I think this is the first time in my life where I've really wanted to stick with it and create a business out of it. And so what's really challenged me is finding people who are on board, and I want them to come naturally. And so a lot of people are health oriented, especially at Cal Poly, but also like they don't have the budget to like make this a business. And I think that it will eventually become that. And I think the most challenging part, honestly, is just getting people excited and like explaining what health coaching is. Because I think a lot of people are clear of what a nutritionist is, clear of what a personal trainer does, but a health coach is kind of like a balance between a accountability coach and someone who can give you tips and honestly like a counselor within health, because health is related to, I've learned through my journey, is like health is actually not really what you're eating, how you're eating. It's like the behavioral patterns that bring you back to that plate. And so
like which behavior, like that's interesting, which just as far as kind of the determination and like a mental thing almost. Yeah,
it is. And it's crazy because I think a lot of people are scared to be vulnerable because we're not really, at least I wasn't conditioned or taught to be vulnerable in my life. And so being vulnerable to people so then I could attract the market, or I guess the people that I want to help out specifically, is really challenging, because that makes me have to break down my wall of like fears and allow them to enter like my struggles, because I think ultimately it comes into like mirroring. Like in life, I believe that everything is just a reflection of yourself. And so if I'm not allowing people to look in, I don't know how
as far as like you as a person. Okay, let's say that I'm bothered by people talking about, I don't know, a politician, and you like that politician. So as a reflection of me, if someone starts talking about it, I'll have a negative response, but you'll have a positive response. You know, that's kind of like a simple example for a complicated scenario.
Yeah. So I think that like ultimately what you don't like in a person, or what a person doesn't like in themselves, is what they don't like about a person. And so I guess in the way that I'm kind of connecting it back to like what's been challenging for me is that to put myself in such a large platform and open up that this is what I've struggled with and this is how I want to help people without like oversharing.
Right.
I think that's where I've struggled, because you can be, I think I've been too vague and people want to feel relatable. And so I think that's ultimately the biggest struggle, is that I'm working, trying to not even curate myself, but just be like raw about the whole process of like, I want to help you like get through things that I've struggled with, like an eating disorder, binge eating, compulsive eating, emotional eating, like even just finding like a community. And I know that like is something that like we would have so many conversations about like what certain people, like how people show up in our lives. But yeah, just to kind of sum it up, is that I think my biggest challenge is like, it's not even what I'm seeing through people, but what I'm experiencing is that like I am not being as vulnerable or open with the process as I want to in order to attract like the people that I want to help.
Well, let me just say, I'm super proud of you, and I commend you and respect you so much for being open about, you know, having an eating disorder or binge eating and that kind of thing. That's something that many women have had problems with, and it's just so stigmatized. I've had problems with it in high school, you know, and thank God that's not happening anymore. But, you know, it's just something that I think the shame, you know, I think there's a collective shame. You know, not only men also experience eating disorders, but around eating disorders and all mental health. And really the only way that we can fix it that I'm seeing is to talk about it and is to be vulnerable. So, you know, just anybody who's doing that, just be super proud of yourself, because, you know, maybe you're not ready to say your whole story, but, you know, even just sharing that you've struggled with the same thing, having that empathy, I think that that's really like shining the light through shame and helping other people with that. So yeah, just thank you for being so honest. From me and from
thank you for
everyone.
letting
share. So about vulnerability. So what to you is vulnerability, and what do you feel? What emotion do you feel after you've shared something vulnerable? Because I've heard multiple times people talking about, the vulnerability hangover. And, you've shared so much and you just feel kind of, oh, was that too much? Going back into the shame. So what do you use vulnerability, and how do you feel? Do you think it's something that you've learned to do more of?
I love this question because it made me laugh because I experienced that. I love the concept of a vulnerability hangover.
It's a good term.
That is so real. It's incredible. Like, I always
now you
like,
can use it.
Yeah, like, I'm so gonna coin that. That's awesome. I'm gonna just use that all the time. But I think I'm gonna start with like how I feel after being vulnerable, and then I'll kind of work into like what I define it as.
Yeah, of course.
So how I feel when I'm vulnerable is there's times where I do feel that vulnerability hangover, which I think I would define as I overshared and I didn't feel understood or heard, and I actually feel more judged than accepted.
Yeah.
And I think that's when you have to be mindful of like where someone else is at in their life, because I think some people can meet you where you're at, but sometimes you have to meet other people where they're at. And that doesn't mean that you're more or less than. It's just the stage of life you're in. And then when it comes to like that kind of high of sharing your vulnerability, it's just like that. Like, I just feel so light and refreshed and content and calm.
You know how
and I feel that's when you go ahead.
I was gonna say I think the best way I would describe it, I feel heard and I feel seen.
Yeah.
If someone's accepting.
And exactly, and I think that's ultimately what we're all seeking in life, is just to be like accepted, heard, loved, supported, and celebrated. And without communication, how are you supposed to achieve that? And so with that is like, it kind of comes to vulnerability, and how I would define that is that like being your authentic self and sharing because it's what you actually feel in that moment, and regardless of what other people are going to say. And like, maybe you'll experience the high, or maybe you feel the vulnerability hangover, but I think it comes with trial and error in terms of who you share it with. But I think ultimately you should, and this is actually something that I learned from you and I love, and I always remind myself, is be unapologetically yourself. Because I think people forget about that, is that like we put on these faces and kind of facades or filters for different groups of people, different themes and whatnot. But, and I'm not saying that, and I think everybody is multifaceted. So someone can bring out some other light in you while someone else can bring in a different light. But ultimately, if you don't feel authentic and you aren't allowing yourself to connect and feel those feelings or feel those emotions and those words leaving your mouth, then it's not being vulnerable. It's just being like, there's no connection being had. And I think with vulnerability, there's connection. Yeah. And I think that's like kind of where I'll leave it at.
Well, just to piggyback off of what you just said, I mean, you know, if you're sharing from the place of one of those kind of semi-authentic, everyday, you know, just getting through the day places, you're not really sharing anything. You know, I think I definitely, I've found myself just kind of like in a conversation, and it's not necessarily a deep conversation by any means, just kind of an everyday conversation. But, you know, I would still love to be present as much as possible, and that's something I've been working towards a lot. And it's so easy to just read from a script in your mind and just say, oh, well, I did this 100%. And what about you? But what are you really saying? And that's not to say that every single conversation needs to be, I'm crying or whatever, but I think that it's important to really feel, how you're feeling and check in with yourself and make sure that you're really there. And if you're not there, maybe it's a day where, you're not able to do that as much, and just try and strive for it the next time.
Yeah, and I love that, because I've actually been practicing the same, as just being present. And I love that you said that you're not just reading off a script, because I'll find myself doing the same thing. Is that I think just you and I both love having those thought-provoking conversations that may lead to just these extremes of emotions, but not everything in life has to be this thought-out process or deep conversation. It could be lighthearted, and I think that's something that I have to also admit to myself, and that's also being that's a type of vulnerability, is that I am struggling with being lighthearted and just all the time, because I'm in my head, but then it kind of reminds me that being in my head is not being present. And so when I'm allowing myself to work on being present, I'm allowed to turn on being that light, airy, not airy, but I guess energized or free-flowing.
Free-flowing
being I am. Yeah. And
easy to live being,
or not, I don't have to rehearse anything that's in my mind. And I think that's the part of being vulnerable, is that you're coming from a place where, like you said, you just are feeling in the moment, and maybe you had held that feeling for a while, but you're allowing that feeling to then be truly felt and expressed in that moment. So
what are some ways, I've definitely, I think that, whenever we're trying to do that and be present and be as authentic as possible, not just reading off of a script in our day-to-day life, it is hard, because for a lot of people, for most people in my experience, that's just kind of our default setting. I've found that trying to let go and trying to not resist, if I do fall back into that habit, just reminding myself, it's normal. This is how my brain has been wired for however many years. And just accepting that, you're not going to be perfect, and accepting that you're not going to be 100%, a free-flowing being every single day. And that's okay, because I really think that, for most things in life, as long as you're trying your best, that's really all you can do, and you can't really ask yourself for much more.
100%, because you think about it as throughout life. My mom always says this is you are the student and life is the teacher. So if you are going through this process, that life is this constant learning source to learn from, that you'll put it in your mind that it's just a practice. There's never going to be that final point of got it. There's going to be times where you got one thing, but then it's it leads to another thing. And so I think it's just embracing where you're at, and it's okay if you feel like you kind of fell back, because I don't really think that there's such thing as I lost myself and got out of control, because no, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And I think it's just you kind of relearn again in a way that's going to actually be sustainable and lifelong than something that was temporary. And so in order to kind of get into those practices of allowing yourself to be vulnerable and really communicate what you truly feel, is I've been doing this recently, is before I say something that I recognize as just a default, I ask myself, is that really what I feel, how I think, or is that just something? Yeah, because it's and then I'll catch myself, and I do it so many times, because we're not really listening to the other person, because we're just waiting for what we're going to say next, and kind of planning it out, and that's not fair for the other person, because it's their time to just share what they have to say. And then I also think that you just anything that you feel that this is maybe outlandish of a feeling, or an extreme, is embrace it, because no one can tell you you're feeling that wrong.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've felt that so many times. Like and I think that kind of plays into the word shame, and that's been brought up a lot actually for me this week. So I think it's incredible how you kind of manifest it in conversation is that like it needs to be talked about. So thank you. And so it's
you don't have to give full details, but what exactly, what prompted that feeling of shame?
I think that has been the root of everything in terms of like when I feel anxiety, when I turn to food, when I isolate myself, is that like there's this shame, and I haven't allowed myself to truly feel that shame. And so with that, I will then disguise it with these defense mechanisms of anxiety, like retreating, eating,
that's
and
interesting.
not eating, or
you just called anxiety a defense mechanism. That is really something that I want you to talk about, because I totally know what you mean, but just kind of explain that, because I think there's something there.
Well, I just recently kind of tapped into this because I have been going to therapy for about like 4 years, which I honestly think, this is just to everybody, that therapy shouldn't be this taboo thing. I think it's becoming more of a like accepted idea and practice, but I think that it's really important to have a safe space, and it doesn't even have to be the traditional therapy of like going into a room and talking with one-on-one. Like therapy can be in a group setting. Therapy could be just exercising with a person that you feel that you can confide in and just express yourself.
Or art or music. Like
it can be in any form that you feel like you can just have a soundboard and allow yourself to just think and speak freely. And I think that's how everything in life should, ultimately become. But I think that it's beautiful to have like these places of like that sanctuary, or like kind of that you can go always back to. So kind of going back to like how I discovered that is that I was in therapy this past week, and I was telling her about just a few like events in my life that occurred, and one being like this nightmare I had, and it brought it back to like the thought of shame. And she was like, I think that shame is ultimately what's the like root problem of it. And she's like, I think that anxiety is like what you're using as a defense mechanism. And so I was thinking about that. And so how I kind of define, I guess, anxiety as a defense mechanism is that like anxiety is, to be honest, this is the first time someone's asking me this, so I have to kind of, I don't know if this is exactly like all that I feel, but I think that it's just this other, I guess, scapegoat that we can point a finger to and say that this is what I'm going through, and some people identify with it, some people just allow it to be an experience, but either way, it's not truly what is the problem, because it continues to show up. And I think until you really allow yourself to feel and understand and then let go that deeper problem, anxiety is going to continue showing up and even stronger from that problem, or not a problem, but I guess like something that you are wanting to work through, or that is not aligning with yourself. I don't know how I would phrase that, but for me, it's like I don't allow myself to feel that shame in any circumstance that I feel shame. It doesn't mean just in the past, but even when it shows up in the present, I'm going to continue to go back to my defense mechanisms of feeling anxious, wanting to go home, and wanting to turn to food. And that is not sustainable, nor is that the way I want to live my life.
Right.
Yeah. And so I think that for people who are struggling with anxiety, is like maybe go a step deeper and ask yourself, like, what triggered that anxiety? Like, what was that emotion that you initially felt?
Right.
And sometimes it's hard to define it, because like I even had to ask like my therapist, like, well, besides happiness, sadness, overwhelmed, frustrated, annoyed, like what are those other emotions? Because I didn't know what to like name it. And so I would always say like, oh, I'm like frustrated or I'm overwhelmed or like I wouldn't use like a word that truly encompassed. And sometimes words don't like embody and define that one feeling. It could be a compilation of feelings into this one thing that you can't put a word to, but allow yourself to kind of dig a little deeper and see where that true anxiety was stemming from and what if that's like a theme that shows up, because I think in everybody's life we experience these themes and we experience like that default behavior to that like theme of events,
right?
If that makes any sense.
So the other day I I've said on this show before, I've definitely experienced anxiety, as a lot of college students or people, because being a person can be difficult sometimes. And I definitely do. I totally agree. I think the best way to think of anxiety is not thinking of maybe getting a bad grade on a test or like someone having problems in your relationship as the problem, but the anxiety itself is the problem. And I think that's something that definitely helps you kind of break out of the pattern and be like, okay, this isn't something that necessarily I need to be worrying about. Worrying is not necessarily helping me. It's kind of trapping me into my own stream of consciousness of jumbled thoughts instead of being able to objectively look at this situation logically. And I think kind of giving yourself some distance, and actually that's something that meditation has helped me a lot with, which I'm not sure if you've meditated. I'm positive you have in the past. I don't know if that's something you try and put into your routine, but I think meditation helps you watch your thoughts, and I think further to that end, meditation helps you realize that you aren't your thoughts. You aren't the things that you're thinking 24/7. You're really kind of a space in between. And also meditation really just helps to have some clarity in your life, have more of an objective perspective on things, and be more calm. I know that you've definitely meditated before. Is that something that you would consider important? Is it a part of your daily routine? What's your relationship with meditation?
Well, I think that meditation looks different for everyone. So I think I have a hard time doing the classic, just sit down, like cross legs or laying on your back and just closing your eyes and being there in silence. That's not how I like to practice it, because that's just not how I like to practice it. So I think that meditation can be in so many different forms. Like you can meditate while walking. You can meditate while you're just, I guess this is a form of laying, but like laying in bed right before you wake, or once you wake up, instead of turning to your phone or like tending to anything that like draws your attention, is just to sit there. Because I think that when you first wake up, that's the perfect time to just really allow yourself to be by yourself with your thoughts and just kind of observe.
Why is that?
Something that because I think that you kind of got a little reset when you're sleeping.
I totally agree.
You didn't have any like external features or like factors entering your like being.
Your ego.
Maybe like the noise outside. And so like you are just who you are in that moment. And I think when you wake up, it's like we're so like, I mean, I'm even faulty of this, is like I use my phone as an alarm, and so like I have to touch my phone in order to turn the alarm off, in order to have that silence. So
and then you kind of look at what the notifications are, and you're like, I don't want to see that right now.
Exactly. And so, but then I always like give myself at least like 5 to 10 minutes prior to getting up, that like few minutes of quietness, and just allow myself to like just observe what I'm thinking. And sometimes like my mind is racing and I'm like, oh my God, like this is going to be the day. But then I think kind of going back to, this is how like I incorporate meditation, is that sometimes it's in my bed, but sometimes it's like walking to the gym and just not having any earphones in, or like any like, I just allow myself to be there with like the sounds of like the birds and just like observing everything that's around myself. And I kind of during both
not doing
times,
things
in my bed. Yeah. Like I'm just like I just kind of remind myself, like, if I'm in bed, I'm in my bed, I'm laying, I'm breathing. And then I kind of end before, like, I get up or even start doing something while once I'm walking is I ask myself, like, well, what do I want to, like, put my intention out in this day? And honestly, I just go with the first word that comes to my mind. So today it was like peace. Like and I think it kind of, for me, it was like, I just want internal peace today.
Has this podcast helped you?
Oh, 100%.
I'm feeling really peaceful right now.
No, like I love our conversations, and that was something that, like, was so fulfilling and memorable within our experience abroad. Is that like, I think that conversations that allow yourself just to explore these thoughts or even express, like, your little routines. Like, I don't share my routine with very many people, but, like, it's just so nice to share, like, this is what I do, like, and then what do you do? And so, like, for you, I guess, like, what do you do for your meditation? Is it the classic form of meditation? And, like, where do you fill that in with your day? Because, like, for us as college students, I think a lot of people feel like they don't have time. And, like, I think you ultimately make time, but, like, how do you work? Like, how do you prioritize it in your life?
Right. So I was actually about to ask you, like, what your routine was. So it's a good transition here. For me, meditation's something that if you don't have time for it, you're not understanding the concept that meditation makes you a 50% more effective person, or however, whatever percent more effective person. And to me, I try and meditate every day. I would say that it generally turns out to be more about 4 times a week. But it is something that's really important to me, and I realize how much it helps me have a better day. So I just sit down in the morning, generally meditate for 10 minutes, and if I'm really feeling like I'm wanting to or needing to meditate, I aim for every day, but that doesn't always happen. And that's fine too, just as much as I reasonably can. And just 10 minutes, and it just gives me that clarity that I was talking about earlier. As far as other things that, I've really started to learn, thanks to a lot of people that I was with in Spain and wherever, that having certain things that you do every day and that you can look forward to and that ground you and that, are investing in your health or your mental health or just making you happier, that's so crucial. So for me, meditation's one of those. Another thing is definitely trying my very best to eat well. And, obviously that doesn't always end up happening because, for example, yesterday I had to run off to a meeting in between classes and I was just needed to get something at a restaurant. And that's fine. I think that goes back to just trying your best. But yeah, I would say meditation, like my top 3 things that I want to do every day. And, exercise is in there, like, I'm aiming for like 3 times a week right now, just because I'm busy and I don't have the energy to do all of these things. So that's something that right now is a per week kind of thing. But per day, I would say my top 3 things are meditating, eating well, and honestly, other than that, I would just say kind of just trying to check in with myself. Just trying to check in either from journaling or, listening to a podcast, trying to open up my heart and get out of that script. What did you relate to whenever I said check in with myself?
Oh, Mimi, I love that because I was like kind of following your list, and then I was like, okay, well, I think my next one, when you were like kind of paused before you went to your third one, I was like, I would say I would check in with myself. And then you said it exactly that. And I was like, yes,
funny how that works.
That's what I do. Yeah. Because like, I think that ultimately that's not a priority. I think when you allow yourself to check in with yourself periodically throughout the day, it's not just a one and done. You're allowing yourself to kind of continue to practice being mindful, because just like your eating habits and your exercise habits and just your daily habits are changing depending on what's going on every day is going to look different when it comes to food, when it comes to exercise, when it comes to being mindful, but like you give it your best for what you can for that day.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately you could always return to checking in with yourself, because that is something that doesn't require any extras.
Money.
It's just you. Yeah, it's just you and yourself. And I think that's so beautiful, because everyone can just start incorporating it. And it's not even like, writing down to check it off. It's just like, while you're, let's just say, even like in the shower, it's like, well, you check in with yourself. And it could be even as like, is this water too hot? Like, I don't know why I went to that example, but like, is this comfortable for me? And like, how can I make it more enjoyable? And I think that's something, it's like, well, how am I feeling in my body? Like, how am I feeling like in my head? And then just like observing. And I think that's something that I had to learn, and I'm still practicing it, is that like, I'm observing my thoughts. I'm observing how I'm feeling. I'm not trying to control it. I'm just allowing it to be, because when I can try to control it, it just heightens and it goes to the complete opposite pendulum that I wanted. And when I just observe it, it ends up passing. And then I return to like my state of just being, if that makes sense.
So what are some of the ways that, people can consciously, either just with thoughts or, something for me is journaling. So what's like some of the ways that people can start to be a little bit happier each day?
I think that what has helped me, and I think kind of back to your like journaling, is like I've been an avid journaler for a while, but like I go through phases. It's not like I go and journal every single day.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like I take week breaks, but yeah, it's like it just kind of is dependent on like, and I think I keep on going back to like the phase, or like even just the way that you are operating in life. But I think that even that, it's like you check in and ask like, is this how I want to be spending my time? And so I think to kind of incorporate more joy in your life is what has helped me, is like I just write down a brainstorm of everything that brings me joy in my life. And then I circle the top 3 that I always want to incorporate each day. And it's like kind of, it goes back to your meditation, eating well, and checking in with yourself. Well, it's like for me, I prioritize eating well, moving my body in some form, and then checking in with myself. And then through those, it's like I will say yes to things that it aligns with my values. And I think that's something that like joy and emotions are always tied with your values. And so a value of mine is I prioritize health. So by valuing health, I prioritize eating well and moving my body, and also checking with myself. But then I also prioritize like family and friends and connecting. And so then to honor that value, I bring in the element of like going on a hike with a friend, and that's also then tying in 2 values at once, but like having that coffee date or whatever it is for you to really bring like more goodness into your life. Because I think that there's always going to be those things in your life that you can't avoid, like brushing your teeth, taking a shower, like, and for instance, like going to class and doing the work, like those are unavoidable, but there's also ways to make it more fun. So like if you are dreading a shower, like put a song, like put a podcast on, like learn something. And I think that is like ultimately like is just wanting to always explore new ways to bring that joy into your life. So curiosity is one of the biggest things I say for implementing joy into your life.
Going back to that shower example that you just said, I think that's something that people like you and I and the people listening to this who are interested in mindfulness, that's really one of the roots of how people get interested, at least for me. I know that, there was a certain point in my life where I realized, I'm acting like I'm so old, I'm not, but there was a certain point whenever I realized, pretty early on, because to me it's not too difficult to figure out that your mindset and your mentality is much more important than what's actually going on outside of you. Now, that's not necessarily true for, very extreme cases where people are going through really tragic and real problems.
Yeah.
But, at least for normal life, and, some people would argue, you can get into Buddhist philosophy and some people would argue would or would not. But for what I'm talking about, for me, my life is quite normal. I haven't really gone through way too many trials or tribulations. And it's easy to still find yourself not very content. And that's something that you have to work on. And that's something that mindfulness, to me, that's why it means so much, because, you can talk about mindfulness all day. What's mindfulness? It's not just meditating or just being like, oh, how does the water feel? Like, even though it is those things, and like those things heighten your experience and are ways to tap in. But I think that really, to me, what mindfulness is and why it's so good is it's seeing the things that are maybe mundane in life or bad and realizing why they're awesome.
Yeah, and I think when you were saying that, I was just thinking of, like, what is enough? And I think that's something that, like, when I think of being mindful, is like, I'm mindful of, like, what is enough for me? And I think what's going to be enough for you is going to be different from me and the other person. But is, like, I think it's just enough. Like, I don't know why we keep going back to our shower example, but it's like I think it's just enough to, like, enjoy the water beating against your body and, like, at the temperature that you enjoy. And then, if that incorporates, like, outside music or, like, some sound just to kind of make it a more enjoyable experience, that's enough.
Yeah.
And it, like, at least for me, and then it's like, you can bring it back to your plate, is like, when you fill up your plate, like, are you filling it up because you feel like you're lacking? Or are you not even filling it up because you're also feeling like you're lacking? Or is the plate whole because it's enough? Like, is what you are serving yourself? And I think it could be a metaphor for everything, is it's like, what is on your plate enough for you? And I think your plate can be your life or your actions, activities.
That should be Harvest Health's tagline.
Yeah, it could be.
You have to seriously write that down now.
Well, now I have it recorded, because I was like, wait, what did I just say?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's why it's a really common theme for people to take the example of the man who's famous and rich and extremely unhappy, and then, the man who has, on the surface level, nothing but is so content, because we don't live solely in the external world of what we have and our status. We live inside of ourselves, and if you're valuing those things that are external more, then I think that's going to put a lot more pressure on you, and I think, I hope that a lot of people can be helped in that way, and I can be helped because I'm still learning, so I just think it's so important to, and that goes back to being authentic. It's so important to, I think, my philosophy has always been, if you're being authentic and you're not trying to change who you are, you don't feel yourself, like we said earlier, saying stuff in a conversation that you don't really feel just because blah, blah, blah is going to happen, then you'll be happy. And that's always been my philosophy for happiness, is just kind of trying to strip away everything that's not real to what is. And that even goes as deep as my Instagram bio, which the quote is something like, I've unlearned more than I don't know. I don't exactly remember what it is, but I think unlearning those things is really important to your happiness, and just being in that flow. I mean, everybody's been in that flow before. It feels so good, Yeah. So
exactly. So, I think it's really important, like when you're kind of saying how you're even just kind of tying back to your Instagram little bio quote, is that I think that the more that you unlearn, the more that you learn about yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that it comes to it's just a continuous process. Like, you're not going to get to this peak moment in your life and be like, I know it all, because I think that the more you know, the less you know.
I pulled up the quote. It says, I've learned the most unlearning what I knew. I love it.
Yeah. And it's so beautifully said. I think that I couldn't say that better, because I think that once you really get to the core of what's important to you and what brings you joy, and not comparing and despairing against anyone else, because you're the only one that defines enough. And I think that's kind of what I was trying to get at earlier. Is that is no one is going to define that for you, but like the marker can be anywhere, and it could forever change. And I think it should forever change. But if you have to like give that to yourself, and no one else, kind of like you were saying, no external factor or feature will ever give you that enough. And so I think allowing yourself to kind of, and it's not saying that I've even figured this out at all, but it's like, I hope to feel that wholeness because I've allowed myself to just really accept like what's enough. And then everything else is a bonus. So like, I mean, just even in our normal day life, like as you and I, like for me, I'm living such a beautiful life. Like, I think this is such a beautiful life, and I hope that doesn't come out of a place of like privilege, but like I feel like even without being in college and having this higher education or even the opportunities that I've been blessed to have, but like just having enough of like, I'm breathing. Yeah. I have my health. I have people that love me. I have a roof over my head. I have food on my plate. And that is something that I think that we all sometimes take for granted. And to me, like, that's enough. And then everything else is just a plus. And there's so many times where I forget that. And there's days where I'm like, I play that like game of like, well, it would be so much easier if I was that person, if I was given this, if that, and that. But like, when you just kind of become more mindful and really just be in that moment, you realize that like everything else doesn't matter because what you have already is enough. So that's all I got.
That is good stuff. Okay, so I've written down a few questions. Generally, I'm loving this conversation so much. So but I do have this one question I'm just really curious to ask you. So you and I live together in Spain, and I just kind of wanted to get what your opinion on your experience was, but more importantly, how did living outside of everything that you knew, your comfort zone and your family and your home, your bed, how did that change your perspective on life? What did you learn?
Oh, I have actually a little story for this, because I think that this kind of plays a lot into the whole answering the question.
Yeah.
So prior to going abroad, I was experiencing so much anxiety, like to the point where like my stomach was perpetually bloated. Like I was day in, day out, and it was like happened for a week or two, and I was like, oh my God, like I even was like questioning, like, am I pregnant? Like, what is happening? And I was just so anxious. Yeah. And I was so anxious. And so it ended up being my mom, my sister, and my brother were all in the living room. And we're kind of like talking about like my upcoming like time before I leave. And I just start breaking out in tears. I'm like, I don't know who I am. How am I going to be like, how am I going to be in a place that I don't even know that's going to be so foreign when I feel so foreign in myself? Like that was so real for me. Like I didn't know I just didn't know how to prepare myself. And I think that's the point.
You felt foreign to yourself in what way?
In that moment, it was so I think people neglect to talk about how college and any time in our life right now as I guess like a young adult, it is always changing. And I think everything in life is always changing. The only thing constant is change. But I think that we go through several transitions that like there's no consistency besides possibly yourself. And even that is not consistent. And I think that's something that like I was struggling with, is that like at the time I really didn't know. It was kind of my transition out of my identifying with an eating disorder to not really identifying with an eating disorder, and I didn't know how to identify myself as, and if I kind of wanted to, like, this label. I didn't know really how to be. And so with all that said, is going abroad with not knowing how to be, all I could be was myself. And that is probably, like, super vague, but I didn't know how to, like, I had no, my default was myself. And I didn't know anybody really that well in the program to then have this already built up idea of who I was. So then I played that character.
That's
instead.
Good,
I just, and I'm so thankful that it happened like that.
Yeah.
But, like, I think, and this is to everybody that's listening, and if you haven't taken advantage of, like, any study abroad opportunity, is, like, I couldn't afford studying abroad, but if you apply to scholarships, it will make it happen for you. And so scholarships helped me so much. And I think that studying abroad is an incredible opportunity just to get a bigger perspective of the world and yourself. And so through going to Spain, that changed my narrative of college, because prior to going abroad, I had such a negative narrative of college. I didn't want to be there. I felt like I was only going for my mom. I felt like it wasn't really what I wanted to do. And then I think it also tied to, I didn't feel like I had a community. And so going to Spain, you and I had such a beautiful dynamic of a floor. Like, we had such a, like, incredible group of girls with so many different personalities and so many different upbringings and, like, perspectives. But there was something that worked so beautifully. Like, we just had this, it was such an empowering energy. And I always, like, think about it, is that, like, that was just such a incredible, memorable moment in my life that I only wish for everybody else to experience, because I think that just everybody was in such a discomfort and out of their, everybody just could be themselves. And I think that was the beauty of it, is that, like, it just unfolded so well. And, like, I think ultimately we just brought, I think a big memory that is really vivid is we would just dance and sing. And that was something that, like, was, like, so simple. Like, it was so simple. It wasn't even going out to the club. Like, we just literally just, like, grabbed our spoons and started singing and standing on the couches. Some people ended up on the table. And it was
well, I was thinking of Thanksgiving, like, whenever we were playing that, like, reggaeton song, and then everybody was just dancing. If you want to see it, it's on one of my Instagram stories. I think the one with the heart on it. But it was just so fun and free flowing. Talk about the definition of free flowing. That's, like, a prime example.
And that was enough for me. Like, everything else in the world, like, we could have traveled everywhere, but it's like that moment with these group of girls was just this, it was so special. And I think that,
and powerful.
I think I'm going off tangent, but, like, going back to, like, my experience abroad and how it kind of my takeaway from it, and, like, how can you refresh my memory of, like, the question? So I want to make sure I'm, like, answering it to the fullest.
What did you learn?
Oh, I think I just learned to just also let go. We don't really have that much control.
Right.
I think that we all think we have more control.
Much less than we think we have.
Like that. And also is that, like, when you allow yourself to just be, you end up at your equilibrium. And that is so much easier said than done. I'm fully aware of that. But when you just, because you want the best for yourself, that little, like, that, the core of you wants you to reach home, and that's the equilibrium of peace, in my opinion. And when you try to control it, it's trying to figure out which way to sway. But when you just allow it to flow, it'll end up in the middle. But I think it takes those times to feeling out of control and allowing it to go from one end to the next, because that's where the learning comes from. And that's when
that's how you learn. And I think that's how you learn. That's how you've learned that you need to let go, you know?
Yeah. And it's like, and I mean, this is, if my mom ever listens to this, hi Mom. But like, I just remember like, she came we had an October break, or like, I guess a fall break. And I remember we had a few riffs because she would be like, I don't understand why you're overthinking. And it just really frustrated me that
I always think of whenever you told me your mom said maybe thinking's not as important as people want to say, and I totally agree with that.
Yeah, and she would always say thinking's so overrated.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand it at the time, but now I'm laughing because I totally get it. It's like just like I would just overthink, like to the point of like is this I don't even know why I'm going back to the shower, but like is this washcloth like gonna be better, or this one? It's like whoa, just like choose the one that you want. Like it doesn't matter which one. Like there's no right or wrong.
Don't
because then you're questioning yourself, and it's like just choose, because you're emotionally driven by something. And I think all choices are emotionally driven in some sort. But like I like learned a lot from just, I think also a lot of people challenged my beliefs because I got out of my comfort zone and was exposed to so many different things in terms of like conversations, thoughts, the way of living, like standards and values.
And your identity was it wasn't based anymore off of what you knew. So then you had to you were left with what you really were and what you really are. That's what I got out of it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is ultimately like what you want to consistently return to throughout the practice of living. But I think that without being mindful, it's going to be more challenging to reach that point because you're not really allowing yourself to tune in and feel what's best for you. Because I think a lot of times, especially this kind of, I guess, is off to a different branch, is that like we have so much noise in this world. And I think that you and I can have so many conversations just based off this one topic, but like there's so much noise, like outside noise, and then add the inside noise, is that there's no time, like there's no space for that silence.
Yeah.
Or like for that internal intuitive voice to really be heard. And so I think honestly, this is something that I wanted to go back to the Spain, is like not knowing the language that well allowed me to really become in tune with myself. Because
you're just so raw in that state. You know, you're not, you can't put it on an identity because you don't have a way to communicate what it would be in the first place.
100%. And it was like, I just remember like walking down in the streets of the city, and I was just like, I could kind of hear, like understand the little kids talking, and I like would try to like pick up on what they're saying, but like they're speaking so fast and like using so many different words that I didn't have in my vocabulary that I was just there, and it was like just almost like white noise where it became peaceful, and then I was really able to like tap into what I was feeling and how I was thinking, and allow myself just to experience it and enjoy observing the conversations and like people watching, and just, I don't know, instead of feeling like I had to always be involved. And like that was so refreshing. And that was something that I learned, is that like it's really important to have those times of silence. It's okay to say no. It's okay to step away. It's okay to, I don't, it's like, but I also didn't feel like I was lacking anything because I wasn't involved in these conversations, because I was just enjoying being on the opposite side of the experience and appreciating the like visuals and like the beauty of the foreign language that I was trying to and still trying to learn. So I think that's like all that was for.
Well, you know, I think I think that that's so important too, because also you just learn to appreciate being able to just ask for, what you want on a menu or something, or just have a conversation with whoever. But here I have written down, and we're going to have to wrap up pretty soon, even though I don't want to at all.
We could do a part 2 if anybody's interested.
we can and we will, Petrina. But there's this quote that I always go back to whenever I think of you. There's like certain things that I think of. I think of our conversations. I always think of what your mom said whenever she said thinking's overrated. And I always think of this quote that you said that you lived by in Spain. That's, quote, "Life should be orgasmic," unquote. And I so agree with you. I think that life should be absolutely incredible. Life should be thrilling and energetic, and it's a lot of the time it's not. And I really think that the best way that we can go from a place of it's not to it is just allowing it and just being happy. Like, being happy doesn't have to be, I've done, I meditate every day and then I go eat healthy food. Like, sometimes you can just practice being happy just because you want to be happy, and obviously not every day, but just making space, like we said earlier, making space for the joy and making space for, I'm going to do this thing that I like today because I know it's going to make me happy. And I know that it's going to lead to my life being orgasmic. And I think that's so awesome.
Yeah, and I think just one thing to kind of add on to that quote that was like 2 years ago is that oh my God. It's like, this is where I'm like, so many people could be listening. But that's exciting. Is that like, you can reach an orgasm in so many different ways, and it's going to be great no matter what. It's going to be different. And I think that is just so exciting. And because you don't know how, or like, I don't know. It's just like, it could be it could be a metaphor, an analogy, like whatever you want to put it. But like, it is so, I think it stands still so true. And I think that I need to start incorporating that more into my life, because sometimes I don't always feel that way. And I think that also it's like, but you think about like when after you're like when you're calm afterwards. It's like after you peace. Like you're at peace, and it's like nothing else can concern you. I don't know.
I think a lot of the times we try and we try and say, I need to figure out my life. We don't say, I need to enjoy my life. I need to make my life this good. It's more of like a problem we're trying to solve instead of an experience that's to be lived and enjoyed and shared with other people that you love. And
Shared.
Yeah. Petrina, you're awesome. Okay.
Well, thank you so much. I love having conversations with you.
It's not over yet. It's not over quite yet. I'm going to ask you a rapid fire round. Are you familiar with what rapid fire is?
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's like putting me on my stutter.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So just if anybody listening is not familiar with rapid fire, Petrina's going to answer these questions and this is a mindfulness podcast, so they're not easy questions to answer quickly. And she's going to try to answer these as quickly as possible. So in one sentence or less. Okay, I have 5 of these.
That's so hard for me.
What is the meaning of a good life?
Joy and inner peace. Yeah.
Does life require a purpose and a goal?
I think that you're okay.
You gotta go quick.
It does. I think this is so hard. Okay, I think life, yes, a purpose, but I think purposes will look different. And I think my purpose is returning to myself, and then through that, I will use goals. To achieve
if
that purpose.
If everyone spoke their mind, would this world be a better place?
Yes, 100%, because communication's everything. It's the bridge to uncertainty.
I love that. Okay. If death is inevitable, why bother doing anything?
Oh, because it's the reason to do everything.
Okay. One last question. This is your last question. What can we change whenever we are empowered?
The way that you use that power, I think starting with being kind to yourself, and then this is going to be long, but I'm sorry. Being kind to yourself and then spreading that kindness, and just understanding that everybody's going through something, and just putting good in the world. Just be kind to everyone, even when it's hard, but be kind.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Petrina, I've loved this conversation so much, and thank you so much. I appreciate and I admire, and I know that other people do, and that you will be rewarded for how vulnerable and kind you are as a person and as a health coach, and just with everything you do. So thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you so much for allowing me to join you on this beautiful project. Like, I think that this is ultimately like an incredible outlet for you to express like your creativity and your beautiful mind. So thank you for letting me be a part of it.